Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about bar chords, which is usually everyone's least favorite subject to talk about in guitar lessons because they're so difficult. But today I'm going to show you kind of a way to visualize them, a way to technically do them with your left hand, and maybe a way to theoretically understand them so that you'll feel a little more encouraged and you'll be able to incorporate them into your practice. First off, I like to start with the definition, and that's that a bar chord is just playing a chord where your index finger presses down more than one string and no other strings, or no open strings are allowed to sound. So I like to envision my first fingers kind of like a capo right here, clamping down the string so I get a nice sounding chord. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is learn how to visualize these. And the easiest way to do it is to see one of your open chords that you're really familiar with, like an E chord. And then we're just going to end up moving this E shape all up and down the guitar with one difference. We need to make the E with fingers 2, 3, and 4. And then when we scoot it over a fret, we have to bar our first finger down like that. And now we have an F bar chord. Alright, so now let's try this with like an E minor chord. So we'll make our E minor. Typically we make E minor with fingers 2 and 3, but since we're going to be using our first finger to bar here in a second, let's use 3 and 4 for our E minor chord. Now we scoot it over a half step, and we take our first finger and bar it across all 6 strings on the first fret, and we get an F minor. And just like the major shape, you can move this up and down the guitar and get a bunch of different minor chords. You don't have to know which minor chord you're playing right now. We'll get to that here in a little bit. Okay, now the technical, this is probably the most important part. If you have proper technique while you're playing a bar chord, it'll allow you to work smarter and not harder. Mostly when I teach them on a bar chord, I see them really squeezing the guitar neck really hard. Your hand starts to cramp, your thumb hurts, all that stuff, and the chord still doesn't sound good. So if you follow these tips on the technique, I think you'll see that you won't have to work so hard. Your hand might cramp every once in a while, but for the most part, it's going to be a lot easier to get the same sound. Okay, so let's start with our bar chord shape up here, where I'm barring on fret 5, and we're going to build it from the ground up. So the first thing I want you to do is put your finger number 2, your middle finger, on fret 6 on the 3rd string. Alright, notice it's nice and curved at both knuckles, and most importantly, my thumb is right across from it, like that. Most people are going to want to have their thumb too high up here. You want to bring it down. It's pointing straight up towards the sky and right across from my middle finger. The next step is to take these 2 fingers and put them in your E shape so that you're on fret 7 on the 5th string, fret 7 on the 4th string, and then adjust your wrist to where this is the easiest for your fingers. If your wrist is over here, you're going to have a hard time reaching. But if you move it over this way, it's going to be a little bit easier to get those 2 frets. Alright, and as the last step, I want you to take your first finger, straighten it out, from the big knuckle all the way to the tip, it needs to be totally straight, and then place it at the very front of the fret, straight up and down. Notice what I didn't do. I didn't curl the bottom of my finger underneath the neck like that. That's what most people want to do, and it's really hard to get a good bar. I had it straight, and I barred all the way across the strings. If it's easier for you, you can even overbar, so that part of your finger is sticking up above the guitar. Alright, for some of you, this will already sound like a great bar chord. You can try strumming it, and it will sound lovely. For most of you, we're going to need a few extra tips to get this sounding good. Alright, so tip number 1, we're going to try to lean back on the bony part of your first finger. So, when you look at your first finger, the front part is what we naturally want to bar with, but it's also the part that has the most extra skin on it, so it's really hard to get a good firm bar. But if you touch this side of your finger, closest to your thumb, you'll realize that's a lot closer to the bone. It will hurt a little bit, but it will also get you a better bar sound. So when I'm making my shape, start with the middle finger, add these 2, put this at the front, I try to lean back on this side of my finger to get a better sound. Tip number 2 is to use your arms and your chest more than your fingers and your thumb. If you're finding that your fingers are getting really, really tired and it feels like you just can't get enough pressure, then what you need to do is use the rest of your body to make this work better. This sounds kind of weird, but it helps quite a bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my forearm over here and my fingers over here to press the guitar in, and then instead of my thumb pressing back, my chest actually is pressing back just a little bit. You don't want to overdo this and snap your guitar in half, but at the same time you can add a little bit of pressure, and this will allow the strings to be pressed down. And tip number 3, this is usually the weirdest one I give people, is to sleep on it, because there have been studies that show if you will take a nap after you practice this sort of thing, your brain will learn these new motor skills quicker. And this is a very new motor skill for most people. It feels very weird and uncomfortable. But the more you practice it, the more you sleep on it, forget about it, come back to it again, that's when you're going to see results. So don't be frustrated if you don't get it on the first try. Okay, so let's look at the next section of this, which is the theoretical aspects of a bar chord. And the wonderful thing about bar chords is that once you learn them, you can play any major or minor chord up the fretboard. So for example, if I have my E shape, and I'm using it without my first finger so I can get ready to bar, and I scoot it up a half step and bar, then I'm playing an F. If I do the same thing, another half step, I'm playing an F sharp, and if I move it up again, I'll play a G. So on and so forth up the whole guitar neck. So chords that previously would have been a little difficult to imagine how to play, like a B flat chord, you can just count up E, F, G, A, B, then move back a half step for B flat, and all of a sudden you have a nice B flat chord. A fun way to do this is just to pick a random chord and find it and see if you can play it. Okay, let's see. One of the things I like to do when I'm first learning how to play my major minor bar chords that are kind of like the E and the E minor shape is to play Hit the Road Jack. It's a great study. So we're going to start up here on fret 5 and do our minor shape, which means our middle finger is not down, just like it's not down whenever we make E minor over here. So I bring that up and bar on fret 5, and here's my A minor. I'm going to play bass down, then I'm going to move back to G, which is barring on fret 3. Since this is a major chord, I put my middle finger back down. Then I'm going to scoot back to F, same shape, and I scoot back to E and just lift the bar off and slide that shape back. And I do a bass down on each chord. Another thing I really like about the style of this song is that the amount of time that you're pressing down is to be really short, but also really intense. Whenever I do my bass down, I put a little extra oomph in the pressure of my hand, but then I immediately get to relax and move to the next chord. So we're minimizing the amount of time that your hand is under that pressure. Okay, so unless you just happen to be one of the lucky people that this comes to naturally, and I do get those students every once in a while, where I show them how to play a bar chord and they never have a problem with it again. That's very rare. Most likely, it's going to take you a couple of weeks of struggling with this before you start to get a good sounding bar chord. And then it's going to take even longer before it feels like it's really become a part of your guitar playing and that you're really comfortable with it. So, besides doing everything we've already done today, there's a couple of extra exercises you can do that will help you kind of get this new concept. One thing is just starting out only barring 2 strings. So if I start at the bottom of the guitar and I bar, still keeping my finger straight, my thumb's right across from my first finger, and I like to pop this knuckle out whenever I'm doing a miniature bar like this. See if you can get a good sound right there. Just like when you're normally playing a fret, it's all about applying enough pressure, being at the very front of the fret, and then having the correct left hand position with your thumb across from your first finger. Once that feels comfortable, see if you can do the same thing but with 3 strings. And then so on and so forth. notice my fingers always straight right here once I start barring more than 3 strings. Okay, this last exercise is a good one, and that's to where if you go ahead and make your major bar chord, you can just kind of practice this motion right here. My fingers straight, I take it off. This is acting as a hinge, this big knuckle, and I slap it on the guitar. And then try and play it. That helps build up the muscle in your hand right here, which is flexing right now. And it also helps you understand to keep this first finger straight. So I like to do it 4 times and then play the chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. If you have any other questions about bar chords, just be sure to bring it up in your lesson, and I'd be happy to go over them in more depth with you. I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you at your next lesson.